As dusk fell on the 24th of June 1953, an F-94C Starfire took off from the Otis U.S. Air Force Base near Cape Cod, Massachusetts, to investigate a mysterious, unidentified flying object. But when the plane reached a height of just 1,500 feet, all the control systems suddenly failed. Unable to gain control of the aircraft, the pilot and his radar operator bailed out. By this time, the Starfire had fallen 900 feet and was plunging towards the ground at 185 miles an hour. The pilot reached the ground safely, but wondered why he had not heard the sound of his plane crashing. In fact, there had been no explosion and no impact. The plane had simply vanished. So too had the radar operator. A widespread search turned up nothing except the cockpit canopy cover, which had blown off when the pilot ejected. 5 months later, on the evening of the 23rd of November, an F-89C Scorpion was dispatched from Kinross Air Base to investigate a UFO, apparently flying through restricted airspace over Lake Superior, Michigan. Closely monitored by ground control, the Scorpion tore after its quarry. Seeing the two radar blips merged into one, ground control assumed that the Scorpion had simply flown over the target. They waited for the blips to separate again. But they never did. The single blip vanished, and all radio contact ceased. An extensive search of the lake and the surrounding area revealed nothing. The plane and its two-man crew had completely disappeared. Rumors began to circulate that the Scorpion, like the Starfire months before, had encountered an unfriendly visitor from outer space. Though the idea of UFOs was a new one, pilots have reported seeing strange things in the sky since the closing stages of the Second World War. On the night of the 22nd of December 1944, nothing could have prepared the pilot of a P-38 Lightning for what he was about to see. As he nervously scanned the dark skies 10,000 feet over Germany's heartland, he saw a glowing, fire-colored sphere racing out of the blackness towards his plane. When it reached the P-38, the sphere leveled off and began moving around the wingtips. No matter what he tried, the pilot could not shake it off. Then, almost as if it had grown tired of playing a game, the strange object suddenly disappeared at great speed, leaving the relieved pilot to return safely to base. Later, other pilots returning from missions reported seeing the same kind of phenomena. Sometimes the spheres appeared as sinister, metallic-looking objects. Sometimes as fiercely glowing balls of fire. And sometimes as twinkling clusters of brightly colored lights. But whatever their appearance, they did nothing more than appear fleetingly before vanishing. These mysterious objects were nicknamed Foo Fighters, after a popular comic strip of the day featuring a character called Smokey Stover. Smokey's catchphrase was, "Where there's foo, there's fire." The first pilot known to have used the term, in December 1944, was U.S. Lieutenant Donald Myers. From Chicago, Myers had probably seen the Smokey Stover strip in one of his hometown newspapers. He described encountering a Foo Fighter. "It chased me 20 miles down the valley of the Rhine. I turned to starboard, and the two balls of fire turned with me. We were going at 260 miles an hour, and the balls were keeping right up with us." Later, when highly secret U.S. military files from November 1944 to January 1945 were released, at least one report corroborated Myers' mysterious encounters in the skies over Germany. It described 5 or 6 red and green lights in a T-shape, which followed another aircraft for several miles before vanishing. Although the name Foo Fighters sounded harmless, the Allied powers took them seriously and worried that the Germans had invented some kind of new secret weapon with extraordinary capabilities. When America entered the war following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Hitler knew the stakes had risen. In response, he ordered his teams of brilliant scientists and engineers to come up with a series of secret weapons, aircraft, and other deadly military hardware with which to confront the enemy. The most effective were the so-called vengeance weapons, of which the deadliest was the V-2 surface-to-surface missile. Packed with high explosives, these 46-foot-long, 12-ton unmanned rockets could reach 3,600 miles an hour and were at that time impossible to destroy. Hundreds rained down on Britain, causing widespread panic, massive destruction, and great loss of life. Following the devastating success of the V-2s, Hitler's aviation designers came up with the Me-163, or Comet, a small rocket-engined interceptor plane, capable of flying 600 miles an hour at 40,000 feet. As the Comet took off, it jettisoned its undercarriage, giving the stubby little plane an even faster rate of climb. Even more revolutionary was the Horten bomber. Designed as a giant flying wing, the prototypes bear an uncanny resemblance to the stealth aircraft of today. With a projected range of 7,000 miles, speeds exceeding 600 miles an hour, and a ceiling of 52,500 feet, the Horten was intended to cross the Atlantic to bomb the US mainland. By the end of 1944, Germany was clearly losing the war. But the Allies were aware that Hitler's scientists were still working on aircraft like the Horten and the Comet, which might just tip the balance in Hitler's favor. So when reports started coming in about the so-called Foo Fighters, the Allies feared a new and deadly German threat. But the Foo Fighters, whatever they were, didn't seem aggressive. It was not until after the war that planes and their crews simply began to vanish. At the end of the Second World War, the US government appreciated the ability of Hitler's top scientists, especially those involved in rocket research, and took them to the States before they could be enlisted by the Soviets. The most renowned of these was Dr. Wernher von Braun, the man behind the lethal V-2 rockets. He had led a remarkable team at the top-secret Peenemünde base. The Americans were surprised to learn that Hitler scientists were at least 5 to 10 years ahead of their own. The ex-Nazi scientists settled into their work at Fort Bliss, Texas. The vast open area of nearby White Sands, New Mexico, was used to test new missiles and rockets. It was not long before US pilots once again began to see mysterious objects in the skies. In June 1947, a marine transport aircraft went missing in the Cascade Mountains of Washington state. Businessman Kenneth Arnold, a pilot with more than 4,000 hours flying time, was convinced he could find the plane and claim the $5,000 reward. At 2 p.m. on the 24th of June, Arnold took off from the Chehalis airfield. It was a perfect day, clear and bright. Arnold's plane, a rugged single-engined Corsair, was particularly suited to mountain work, and he estimated it shouldn't take more than an hour to find the missing transport. After a few minutes, he leveled out at 9,500 feet and started a sweep of the area around Mount Rainier, when he was startled by a sudden flash of bright light across his plane. A DC-4 was in the vicinity, and he thought the flash might have been a reflection from its fuselage. Then, to Arnold's utter amazement, a tight formation of 9 crescent-shaped aircraft suddenly swept into view. As he watched, Arnold wondered if he had stumbled across some new, highly secret military planes. He later said, "What kept bothering me as I watched them flip and flash in the sun right along their path was the fact that I couldn't make out any tail on them, and I am sure that any pilot would justify more than a second look at such a plane. I observed them quite plainly from a distance of between 20 to 25 miles." Arnold abandoned his search for the missing transport plane and raced home, where he breathlessly described his mysterious encounter. The press seized on his description of the UFOs as flying like a saucer skimming across a pool of water. The term flying saucer was thus coined, and Arnold went down in history as the first person to have allegedly encountered one. Arnold, a former military pilot, was considered a reliable witness. As the FBI itself stated, it is difficult to believe that a man of Arnold's character and apparent integrity would state that he saw objects and write up a report to the extent that he did if he did not see them. The US authorities denied any knowledge of the strange objects, so Arnold suspected that he might have seen some unknown type of Russian aircraft. But the more he thought about it, the more he was convinced that what he had seen over the Cascade Mountains that summer day in 1947 defied all rational explanation. Stranger still was the fact that just 2 weeks later, a farmer discovered unusual pieces of metal scattered on the ground near Roswell, New Mexico. The 509th Bomb Group, which examined it, initially said the metal appeared to be from a crashed UFO. They later claimed the farmer had found nothing more than the remains of a weather balloon. Nonetheless, Area 51, as it became known, was sealed off to the public. Until his death in 1984, Arnold was obsessed with finding the truth and even wrote a book on the subject. Following Arnold's UFO experience, there was a rash of sightings of other strange objects over America. Some were undoubtedly meteorites, burning up as they hit Earth's atmosphere. But there were others which remain a complete mystery. Early in the afternoon on the 7th of January 1948, Kentucky State Police headquarters in Elizabethtown received a number of puzzling phone calls. Worried reports of an enormous circular object high in the sky. The strange object appeared to be moving slowly south. Alarmed that some sort of elaborate robbery might be in progress, the state police passed the information on to the military police guarding nearby Fort Knox, which held America's vast gold reserves. The MPs, in turn, informed the control tower at Godman Air Force Base. By this time, however, astonished base personnel had already seen the strange object for themselves. Meanwhile, 4 P-51 Mustangs of the Kentucky Air National Guard 165th Fighter Squadron had taken off on a low-level training flight from Marietta, Georgia, and were now in the area. As the Mustangs neared Godman, the control tower asked them to take a closer look at the mysterious UFO. Their leader, a 25-year-old captain, Thomas Mantell, was a distinguished Second World War fighter pilot. Mantell had logged nearly 3,000 hours since graduating in the summer of 1943. Pausing only to allow one of the squadron to continue on the original flight path, Mantell spiraled up to 15,000 feet at full power, followed by the other 2 planes. At 2:45 p.m., he radioed the Godman control tower saying, "The object is directly ahead of me and above me now, moving at about half my speed." Half an hour later, Mantell reported back with a description of the UFO. It appears to be a metallic object, or possible reflections of sun from a metallic object. It is of tremendous size. At 23,000 feet, Mantell's fellow pilots were feeling dizzy from lack of oxygen. They decided to break off and descend to a safer level, leaving Mantell apparently heading straight for the sun. His radio responses became increasingly garbled. Then, there was silence. An hour and a half later, the wreckage of a Mustang was found in a field near a farmhouse. The shattered body of the dead pilot remained strapped in his seat. It was Thomas Mantell. Meanwhile, the giant UFO appeared to continue on its course. It was last seen in the skies over the Midwest, where a dozen airfields reported seeing a flaming object on the far southwest horizon. However, no more planes were sent up. The mysterious UFO eventually disappeared. As news of Mantell's dramatic and violent death leaked, the press began to speculate wildly about how he had died. The most popular theory was that he had been shot down by an alien spacecraft. This was swiftly refuted by the US Air Force, which offered 2 more likely possibilities. The first was that Mantell had mistaken the planet Venus for a UFO. In climbing too high, it's likely he lost consciousness through lack of oxygen, lost control of his plane, and crashed. The second was that the UFO might have been a giant weather balloon, which had been released from a ship and then drifted inland, where it was mistaken for a visitor from outer space. When viewed from beneath, such balloons could assume an unfamiliar shape, not unlike that of a flying saucer. However, as the UFO had been seen simultaneously by people hundreds of miles apart, this was discounted. Whatever it was, the strange object was never seen again. Despite the official explanations for Captain Mantell's death, a great many people thought that with the Cold War between East and West gathering pace, what he had actually encountered was some sinister new Russian aircraft sent to spy on the US. Similarly, the Soviet people were convinced that any strange sightings over their own vast country were of dangerous new weapons being developed in the West. They reacted in the same way as the Americans, sending their fighter planes screaming into the sky to track the mysterious intruders. But they too never found out what they were or where these mysterious objects came from. But whatever their pilots might have thought, neither the US nor the Soviet governments really believed that these UFOs were from outer space. Observers in the West thought that sightings over America might have been highly advanced versions of early German secret aircraft, such as the Horten Flying Wing, which in the years since the war could have been perfected by the Soviets as a new Cold War weapon. Or the rocket-engined Comet Interceptor, which had been years ahead of its time, even at the end of the war. Certainly, a glimpse of the extraordinary US Lockheed SR-71A, better known as the Blackbird spy plane, might well have convinced an unwitting pilot he was looking at a UFO. Able to reach 100,000 feet and fly at more than 3 times the speed of sound, the sinister and menacing-looking Blackbird was a closely guarded military secret for at least 10 years. Another strange aircraft which caused a flurry of flying saucer reports when it first appeared over America in 1947 was the US Navy's propeller-driven Chance Vought V-173. The Flying Flapjack, as it became popularly known, had a top speed of 500 miles an hour and was armed with 6 20mm cannon. As the curious craft headed for a summer air display at Floyd Bennett Naval Air Station, bathers on the Long Island Sound beaches, alarmed at such an unfamiliar sight, rushed for the phones. US authorities treated any credible sighting or encounter with UFOs with the utmost seriousness. Each sighting was investigated thoroughly by the Air Force, as Major General James Samford, US Air Force Intelligence Chief, and later head of the top-secret National Security Agency, explained.
The Air Force interest in this problem has been due to our feeling of an obligation to identify and analyze to the best of our ability anything in the air that may have the possibility of threat or menace to the United States. In pursuit of this obligation, since 1947, we have received and analyzed between 1,000 and 2,000 reports that have come to us from all kinds of sources.
According to General Samford, most of these reports could be explained as hoaxes, erroneously identified friendly aircraft, tricks of light, or weather aberrations. But there were some for which there was no easy answer.
However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things. It is this group of observations that we now are attempting to resolve.
Every American UFO sighting was carefully logged in the Blue Book, a register set up by the Pentagon in 1951. By the time it was closed in 1969, the book contained more than 12,600 entries. Since Allied planes first encountered Foo Fighters over Germany in the last stages of the Second World War, there have been countless sightings of unknown flying objects for which there is no apparent plausible explanation. One theory suggested that as the Foo Fighters were visible to the naked eye, yet undetectable to radar, the phenomena might have been a strange and rare form of spherical lightning, sometimes referred to as St. Elmo's fire. Later sightings were ascribed to the prototypes of top-secret US aircraft, such as the Stealth Fighter and Bomber. But just how and why some planes vanished when investigating these strange UFO phenomena remains a mystery.
And we've more vanishings next Monday to Friday at 7:30, beginning with the disappearance of the Royal Navy frogman Buster Crabbe. After the break here on the History Channel, there's the first of a two-part Emmy Award-winning dramatisation of the Nuremberg trials, with Alec Baldwin as the lead prosecutor in the fight to bring Nazi war criminals to justice.